Hello everybody, welcome back to Every Man Has a Story. Really lucky today. I'm able to get Klaus to sit down again with another interview. We had such an interesting two videos before. We talked about neurology, we talked about biology, marine biology, and today we're going to discuss, a couple different things, but one thing that Klaus wanted to talk about was deep diving of whales, is that right, and other animals?
Whales as well as human free divers. Very interesting parallels, basically.
How deep can, like which whale can dive the deepest?
I think that's a good question. I know the sperm whales are the second, and it might be I think it's called a Mura's whale, which is even deeper, so just above 1,000 meters.
1,000 meters, which is less than 3,000 feet.
About 3,000 feet.
3,000 feet. Wow. Now that's just mind blowing how deep that is.
It is. So these sperm whales are hunters of giant squid.
Right.
Very specialized. If you look, if you're ever into Margetta, there's actually a skull of one. In the Marine Mammal Museum at the Marine Lab in Silliman, and then they have this. You've probably seen these specialized teeth. So rows of huge daggers, which are specialized to impale these very slippery mollusks. And so it's a real unique niche. There's this huge biomass. And deep waters with these large squids, which it's been only a couple of years that they've ever been filmed alive, the giant squid.
Really?
Yeah. Previously they had only been known from washed up specimens on beaches. So they're hunting these, and it takes, obviously whales are mammals, right?
Yeah.
Mammals evolved from some kind of Permian reptile. Reptiles initially evolved from some kind of ancient amphibian. So we've been air breeders for 300 million years plus, and then roughly 35 million years ago, whales started going in the other direction. Right? Why would they do that? I mean, there's a lot of food in the ocean.
Well, so did whales originally come from land and go to the sea, or were they originally from the sea?
They originally came from land. So
that's interesting.
There are some fossils. I think they were found in Nepal, and they were essentially small. Like deer-like animals, like the size of a large dog, and then they became more, amphibious, akin to or like a hippopotamus, and then they increasingly specialized for becoming more and more marine, and then now, obviously, like none of the dolphins and whales we have now spend any of their lives on land, right? I mean, like they would perish.
Now, do you think they're still evolving, still changing?
Sure, for sure, absolutely.
Now, do you think a million years from now, 100 million years from now, that they will ever have gills? Like, why haven't they ever developed gills? I wonder that. Why didn't they do that? That's
a very good question, actually, and I believe that Richard Dawkins actually discusses that in one of his books, and is it impossible to re-evolve gills? No, but I mean, he argues that for them breathing is more like urinating for us.
Oh.
So, you're like a couple of times a day you have to urinate, and then you just go, right? For them, every 30 minutes, every 15 minutes you have to take a breath, and then you just briefly surface.
So, but if you're at 3,000 feet down, it takes a while to get that deep, so that's got to take 15 minutes.
It does. And then so the thing is, what they evolved is there is a very powerful way of storing oxygen, and it's not in the lungs. So if you look at your average whale, and then you look at the lung size relative to the body size, it's not actually that different from a human. So it's not that they can, that would be the first assumption. You just take an incredibly deep breath, right? And then you go. But what they have, so it's unfortunately still happening, whaling, right? If you've seen footage of that, what's the color of the blood of these whales?
Red, right?
Yeah, red, but it's dark red. So it's this is their blood is just loaded with hemoglobin, and their muscles, same thing. They're almost black. So if you get pork, it has this. There's myoglobin in there, right, which is like an oxygen-binding chemical, but then a little bit, right? So the pork or your beef is light red, obviously. Whereas the whale meat is so dark because it's so, there's all that myoglobin, which is this chemical which, binds the oxygen and it keeps it there for later use. So they, instead of just storing air as gas volume in a lung, they stored it in their tissues in a chemically bound. One thing which they evolved.
Is that what deep diver or free divers do? That they hyperventilate and they put more oxygen into their blood so that they can hold their breath longer?
Yeah. So it's related. It's not the same. So actually, just this morning, in preparation for today, I reread the chapter of Gehirn Extreme, Brain Extreme, like the book I wrote a couple of years ago. And there's a chapter about that. So what's happening is what do you think makes you want to take a breath if you hold your breath?
Lack of oxygen?
Well, not quite. Actually, it's too much CO2.
Oh.
So your body there's a sensor in your brainstem, and it's not a sensor for lack of oxygen, for build-up of CO2, which is the end product of respiration. So it's a curious anecdote of the history of science that brain region is called the pre-Bötzinger complex, and the Bötzinger was a wine from a region in southern Germany. And during the conference, when that region was discussed and named, the scientists were drinking that wine.
Wow.
So they had the Bötzinger. Curiously, there's no Bötzinger complex. There's just the pre-Bötzinger complex. So he has to save the Bötzinger for after the conference.
That's fascinating. So, just quickly on a deep diver, that's a whole other subject there, but on these free divers, do they hold their breath, or do they let their air out and count on the oxygen in their blood?
Human divers typically hold their breath. However, a lot of free divers actually say they prefer to dive exhaled. Because same thing, right?
Less buoyancy too, yeah.
It's buoyancy, and a lot of their oxygen would be stored in their tissues. Now, interestingly, with the whales, if I recall that correctly, the baleen whales, the filter feeders, they dive inhaled. Whereas the toothed whales, like the sperm whales, they would actually exhale before diving. So, and a lot of free divers tell me, they prefer to exhale dive. And so, why do they hyperventilate? To come back to that, that drops the CO2 level. So the sensor, the pre-Bötzinger complex, thinks you're actually fine. You don't need to breathe yet. You can overdo that, right? So if you hyperventilate too much, and then you end up not having the urge to breathe, but your oxygen levels are drop. What happens is that you can pass out. So this is it's called the shallow water blackout, and it's a serious danger in using hyperventilation to extend your free dives.
Is that the similar type of thing would happen if you're using a rebreathing system? And you're breathing just oxygen?
True. So the physiology here is related. That because if you have a rebreather, which is like this advanced diving. Have you dived a rebreather?
No.
I have. I own one. Unfortunately,
Really?
I haven't dived it in, sadly, in almost 3 years.
Wow.
It hurts. It's just it's complicated. You know, you have to have your sensors and the absorbent chemical. So what happens with a rebreather? You breathe in your breathing gas, you breathe it out. The CO2 gets absorbed by this chemical, and then a little bit of oxygen gets added back in. Now, if there's something wrong, and there's always the chance for something to be wrong, right?
Right.
You can end up with the CO2 not getting taken out, and then you have the opposite problem as these free divers, but you don't have like too little CO2, which knocks you out, but because you're lacking oxygen, but you have CO2 buildup. And then the CO2 acts as a narcotic. So you can just get a toxicity hit from having too much CO2.
And that's where you get the euphoria and you start just thinking you can breathe like a fish and stuff?
Well, still something different. There's another interesting effect. So like a CO2 anesthesia is just essentially it's unpleasant drunkenness.
So you would know something's wrong?
Yeah, if it goes slow enough. In some cases, you just go from you're fine to you being unconscious. If there's a slow build-up, you kind of feel, you have a headache, and you're just not right. What you mentioned with the euphoria, this is nitrogen narcosis.
Right, that's what I was thinking of. Yes.
Again, really, really interesting effect. So essentially, what you have in air is oxygen, and you have nitrogen. And then the oxygen you metabolize, right? That's what you live off. The nitrogen here, in this cafe or on the surface, is just a inert gas. So it doesn't do anything metabolically in your body at 1 bar, at atmospheric pressure. Once you go deeper, the concentration of the nitrogen, the partial pressure increases, and you have these narcotic effects. So I'm sure you've, when maybe at a techno party or at the dentist, have you inhaled laughing gas?
Yeah, I've had that. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, that's really the closest you can get on land. Now, what's happening is that somehow the nitrogen gets dissolved in the membranes of your nerve cells. Right? So every single cell in your body is surrounded by membranes. The nitrogen then essentially diffuses in there and causes some trouble. What exactly this is not quite clear. There are a couple of sodium and calcium channels which are very specifically affected by this. It seems also that your membrane is essentially, you can think of this as a two-dimensional liquid. And then if the nitrogen goes in there, this liquid becomes more fluid.
Yeah.
And that messes up the organization of the membranes at the contact points between individual cells, the synapses, where these membranes are highly organized.
Right.
I think that there's a very good argument to make that over there, your the effect of the nitrogen is taking place. So it's clearly related to lipid-soluble gases entering your bodies, because things like for deep dives often helium is used, which is not very lipid-soluble. And that doesn't have this narcotic effect.
So you can breathe helium at a deep depth, and it'll keep you alive. But if I'm on land and I had a tank of helium and a regulator, and I tried to put that in my mouth and tried to live off that, I would die, wouldn't I?
Well, you have to mix it, right? You have to mix oxygen and helium.
Oh, so it's not just pure helium.
It's not pure helium, but you replace the nitrogen in your air, at least partially, with helium. So there's actually a you should look it up. There's a very interesting, historical clip. I think it's on YouTube, where there was a diving experiment where there were a couple of experimental US Navy divers in this underwater habitat, and they were breathing helium. So you can probably guess how their voices sounded.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like Mickey Mouse.
You're right, right.
And then they were going to have like a talk with Lyndon B. Johnson,
Yeah.
the president, and then the telephone technician thought something was wrong.
No.
She said, "Sir, you sound funny. You know, is there something wrong with the connection?" And then they said, "No, that's fine." So they, in their Mickey Mouse voice, had to explain to this lady, you know, who didn't know about this physiology, that we actually, it's just fine. Please connect us. That's
I've known that since I was a little kid. We should inhale those helium balloons and talk funny.
Exactly. It's like
quick question before I forget. On the rebreather, do you have to decompress on the way up or not?
You do, but typically less, because you're essentially, when you are diving a rebreather, you can adjust what kind of gas you're using. So you're typically accumulating less nitrogen.
Now, is it unlimited how long you can stay down with the rebreather? Like if you wanted to, say you're doing a shipwreck and you want to stay down for like, you know, an hour,
it's
can
not
you do that?
unlimited, but because you still need to inject a little bit of oxygen.
Can you adjust it while you're in the water?
Yeah, you can, for sure, yeah. But and that will run out, and then your absorbent will also, you know, that which takes out your CO2. That will run out too. So you will end up with probably a maximum of about 3 hours of dive time.
That's a long time.
It is, and that it will also be limited by you're breathing a lot of oxygen. You're breathing very high oxygen concentrations.
And does it all change as you go deeper and deeper?
It does, yeah. So, you know, you have to adjust, basically.
So what, have you got like a gauge or something? Or like how do you control it? Like how do you do that?
You have a gauge, and you have like an oxygen sensor. So it's essentially an electrochemical cell, and the cell says, you know, 0.9 bar partial pressure oxygen.
Yeah.
And then that is the issue. The cells are freaky. So you have to have 3, right? So if one shows you a value which is way off, you can tell that probably that cell failed, and the other 2 are telling the truth. So you have a little, like an electrochemical measurement system.
Sounds to me like in order to use a rebreather, you've got to be a scientist.
Well,
I don't think I could ever do that. I mean,
I don't think you have to be a scientist.
But you have to understand like chemistry and
for sure, yeah.
all these different things.
And you have to be a really, really diligent person. And you can't, you know, cut corners. Like if you, for instance, these 3 cells, right? You have to test them before a dive, and then, you know, if there's something a little bit wrong, if they almost work, that's not good enough. You know, if you're diving open circuit and then there is like a small leak, you probably shouldn't go diving, but I mean, you probably still can, right? If there's like a hair leak in a hose, you know, anything which is wrong, and or for instance, you know, that absorbent, that's usually that lasts for, you know, depending on how much you use, something like 6 hours. It's a very bad idea to say, well, you know, I'm just going to use it 7 or 8 hours. It's probably fine.
So when, for you, as a diver and a marine biologist, when would you say, I need my rebreather, I'm going to use the rebreather for this particular dive? What is the criteria of why you would choose to use that rather than regular tanks?
Yeah, so, I mean, as I said, it's burning in my heart that I haven't dived a rebreather in I think it's more than 3 years now. But you know, there will essentially be 3 uses. One is you don't have any bubbles. And I mean,
that's why the military likes them, right?
Exactly, yeah. So the enemy cannot see you, but also the fish are less perturbed. So if you want to photograph fish which are really freaky, let's say often sharks, they don't like the bubbles. And then so if you have a rebreather, you have no bubbles, you can get much closer. So a lot of underwater videographers really like them. Number 2, you know, extended time. And number 3, especially when you go deeper. So if you are in, let's say, the 80, 90 meter range, if you use regular tanks, your dive will be 20 minutes,
Right.
and there will be a lot of going up and going down. Whereas with a rebreather, you might still have an hour, and so you especially when you're deeper, you really extend your dive times.
Now these chemicals and things you need to supply the rebreather, are you able to get those in the Philippines?
Yeah, for sure. You're not just do you know Asia Divers?
I don't, but no.
Yeah, you should check it out. It's a nice shop. It's essentially behind the police station, going inland, actually on the way to Valencia. They sell that, and these sensors you can. Yeah, there are like a few specialized dive shops. I did my training with Evolution Diving in Madagascar, which I can highly recommend. I can get that from there. So like it's you're very good at asking questions. Interesting that you bring that up. I'm actually I'm eager to use mine again, and I should probably go back to the place which trained me, Evolution, and do a refresher. It's like it's not the kind of thing where you can let your skills lapse.
Now, on a rebreather system, do you have an octopus also?
Well, yeah, it's more tricky than that. So basically, you have that loop, and that's it, right? But then you have what's called a bailout gas. So you would have, let's say, you only go to 30 meters, you would have one air tank, where if your rebreather fails, and one of many possibilities, and you're kind of limited in figuring out what exactly went wrong, right, underwater. You just notice that, well, I'm breathing in water, that can't be good, and then you turn off your rebreather, and you go to the bailout gas.
Okay.
So you.
But it's not for like having a buddy with you, where he's in trouble and you're saving his life.
Well, let's say if you have a buddy, you can't give him like your rebreather,
right?
Breathing air. You would give him the bailout gas.
Oh, you could, okay.
Yeah. So I talked to a guy, really interesting guy, who was with the unexploded ordnance removal department of the U.S. Navy.
Oh, wow.
And they were diving, so that's even a little bit more dangerous than the Filipino fireworks, right?
Right, yeah.
Probably in the same range of danger.
Yeah.
And then he said they were not using a bailout gas, but that's like a military thing, right? So I guess their risk, the acceptable risk, if you're like a combat diver, is higher.
Another question before I forget on holding your breath in these free drivers. Like, what is the record for someone holding their breath? Like, I remember seeing the illusionist David Blaine do a stunt, and I think he held his breath for like 20, 30 minutes, and it was all documented and stuff. Like, what's the longest you've heard like of a human being holding their breath?
So it's very interesting, right? Like, there is like the two categories in this. So if you were allowed to pre-breathe oxygen, so essentially, what you have to do, you really have, I'm not very good at this because I'm not very good at relaxing. So then you really have to like meditate, shut down your heart rate, to like 30. And then you want to pre-breathe oxygen so that your whole body is like loaded with oxygen. And then it's something in that range. I think, he was, I remember he did that, and it's very close to the, I'm not sure, was it the
But he
world
could have
record?
just passed out, right? Because if you get too much oxygen, can't you just black out?
No. But it's just, so I think it's like 20-something minutes, and I think he was he very close to the world record?
Yeah, I don't remember. I thought he broke it. I can't remember.
Broke it.
Yeah.
But then, if you don't pre-breathe oxygen, it goes down massively, because obviously, this, Earth atmosphere is about 21% oxygen. So you have a fifth of the oxygen. So your whole body, a lot of what's dissolved in your blood is nitrogen. So then I think it's in the order of 8 minutes. I have a really nice friend who once set that record for his freediving association, which was a poor apnea, Thomas Scherer.
Yeah.
And I was there at the record event, and it is like the most bizarre sports event I've ever been to. You know, like when you go to like a football game, everybody's
right.
And there it was like twice as quiet as a funeral. Like nobody said a word because he was just so relaxed. And then so this was without pre-breathing oxygen, and I think it was 8 minutes 22 what he did. Yeah.
I saw something in a movie, I don't know if it's true or not, but it was a military thing in a military movie, but what they did is these divers inhaled a liquid, and this liquid, and they're floated, like, almost like they're drowning. And I remember back in the 60s watching a TV show that they had hamsters, and they put them in an aquarium, and in this, there was a tank of some liquid, maybe liquid oxygen or something, and the hamster's like looking like it's drowning, and all of a sudden then it starts breathing in this liquid. Is there anything true? Is there truth to that? What is that?
No, I think I don't think that's routinely used, but I think that was experimentally tried. And I mean, I think the thing is that the transition to that, you're actually thinking you're drowning.
Yeah.
It must be the most horrible thing ever. Right? And then there are two issues, right? And then one is, yes, that was done, and it was like a specialized liquid which was very good at holding dissolved oxygen.
Okay.
And I'm not sure who did these experiments, whether this was like a commercial.
It was like 40 years ago I saw that.
Again, the US Navy. Yeah. The US Navy has a very interesting experimental diving lab. I think it's somewhere in Florida. So it's just horrible to get to, you have to force yourself to drown, basically.
God.
And then number two, it's difficult to get a liquid out of your lungs. Because,
that's what I was just thinking.
Your diaphragm is just not evolved for this. So I'm not actually sure whether they had some kind of, supportive, like compression, like a machine which would compress their chests.
Wow.
Likely. And then the other thing is that if you get liquids on your alveoli, on these terminal bubbles in your lung, the surface tension changes, and you get real issues. That's the reason also why if somebody is in the water and then they inhale even a little bit of water, they need to go to the hospital. So basically, it's called dry drowning. So
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So just like a moderate amount.
It happens like hours later, all of a sudden.
Exactly. Because you're essentially, they get the seawater out, but then that seawater changed the physics of the alveoli in such a bad way that all of a sudden you can't get oxygen anymore, and you might die a couple hours later.
Divers, like, why do they fill a diving tank with air instead of with just pure oxygen? Does it seem like it would be better if you had pure oxygen?
Yep. Again, very good question. So, pure oxygen is actually fairly toxic. So if you breathe it out of the atmosphere, after a couple of hours, you're gonna get a dry cough. So if you have a patient in the ICU, it's an issue that you cannot put somebody constantly on oxygen. Now, once you go deeper, your ambient pressure increases, and so you have to increase the pressure of the oxygen which you're breathing in, and then as a consequence, you get something called free radicals, or reactive oxygen species. Essentially pure oxygen, high pressure, and that messes with your body. And again, it seems that the nervous system is really the most sensitive part of your body, right? I mean, anything like if you know, if you get like a big hit to your leg, it's gonna heal, right? But like a same bump to your brain might kill you. So same thing there. These reactive, highly reactive oxygen molecules, they start messing with your brain and you get a seizure essentially.
Wow.
Now the seizure is not what kills you. So if you seize like that and then you start breathing air again, you're coming back. But if you are having a seizure and you're diving in 25 meters, you're probably going to spit out your regulator and you know, bad things are going to happen, right?
Yeah.
You're probably going to drown. So at roughly, you know, 1.6 bar,
Yeah.
which is roughly in 6 meters, oxygen becomes toxic.
Huh.
Yeah, so it's, and then, you know, it's actually, if you see a newspaper article about a diving accident, and then very often it says, the diver ran out of oxygen. And that's wrong. And then it's like, it's a clear sign that the journalist didn't know anything about diving. And like, if you like Google a few diving accidents, and in half of the articles will have that. That there was no more oxygen, basically.
Well, the early divers, like people like Jacques Cousteau, that started out inventing all this equipment and things. Just think how dangerous it was. Like, it was trial and error. They didn't understand the physics of it, and they just went down and, like, how deep can I go? They had no idea. There must have been a lot of deaths in the early days of diving, which were, when was that, like the 1940s?
Yeah, so I think, you know, there were like a couple of steps, like Cousteau and Hans Haas, like an Austrian biologist, like was a diving pioneer. They started like right after World War II.
So it was marine biologists that really did the cutting edge experimentation, not necessarily like the military, huh?
Mixed. Like Cousteau was a French naval officer.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and then he kind of started diving because, you know, that's cool, and he kind of got like this what is it called, the Calypso, right?
Right.
He got that second hand from the French Navy, and then he was like an adventurer for a couple of years, and then, you know, like it dawned him what biological richness, and he became a good biologist and like a real environmentalist.
So he was a self-taught biologist, marine biologist?
I'm sure he talked to a lot of smart people, but like his background was Navy. Haas was a zoologist. And then, you know, like there was some research, you know, pre-World War II, and then there's the Scottish professor Haldane was one of the key figures, and it's actually so. The story goes that visitors would go to his lab and they would say, excuse me, can I find Professor Haldane? And then they said, well, just follow the trail of the bloody handkerchiefs.
Wow.
So he would do a lot of self-experimentation. And very often, you know, something would rupture in his ear or nose or, you know, lung.
Amazing.
So yeah, like these early times were dangerous. Absolutely.
Well, we're going to end this first section here. We're at 33 minutes, and we'll do another one after that. So we'll keep everything on. So we're going to do another one here. So stay tuned for part 2, guys, and please subscribe and hit that like button. And if you like the video, please share it. Thank you.